Sloane lay wide awake under an open window, watching the stars glimmer through the rustling foliage of the cottonwoods. Somewhere a lonesome hound bayed. Very faintly came the silvery tinkle of running water. For 5 days Sloane had been a guest of Bostil's, and the whole 5 days had been torment. On the morning of the day after the races, Lucy had confronted him. Would he ever forget her eyes, her voice? "Bless you for saving my dad," she had said. "It was brave. But don't let Dad fool you. Don't believe in his kindness. Above all, don't ride for him. He only wants Wildfire, and if he doesn't get him, he'll hate you." That speech of Lucy's had made the succeeding days hard for Sloane. Bostil loaded him with gifts and kindnesses, and never ceased importuning him to accept his offers. But for Lucy, Sloane would have accepted. It was she who cast the first doubt of Bostil into his mind. Lucy averred that her father was splendid and good in every way, except in what pertained to fast horses. There he was impossible. The great stallion that Sloane had nearly sacrificed his life to catch was like a thorn in the rider's flesh. Sloane lay there in the darkness, restless, hot, rolling from side to side, or staring out at the star-studded sky, miserably unhappy all on account of that horse. Almost he hated him. What pride he had felt in Wildfire! How he had gloried in the gift of the stallion to Lucy! Then on the morning of the race had come the unexpected, incomprehensible, and wild act of which he had been guilty. Yet not to save his life, his soul, could he regret it. Was it he who had been responsible, or an unknown savage within him? He had kept his word to Lucy, when day after day he had burned with love, until that fatal moment when the touch of her, as he lifted her to Wildfire's saddle, had made a madman out of him. He had swept her into his arms and held her breast to his, her face before him, and he had kissed the sweet parting lips till he was blind. Then he had learned what a little fury she was. Then he learned how he had fallen, what he had forfeited. In his amaze at himself, in his humility and shame, he had not been able to say a word in his own defence. She did not know yet that his act had been ungovernable, and that he had not known what he was doing till it was too late. And she had finished with, "I'll ride Wildfire in the race, but I won't have him, and I won't have you. No!" She had the steel and hardness of her father. For Sloane, the watching of that race was a blend of rapture and despair. He lived over in mind all the time between the race and this hour when he lay there sleepless and full of remorse. His mind was like a racecourse with many races, and predominating in it was that swift, strange, stinging race of his memory of Lucy Bostil's looks and actions. What an utter fool he was to believe she had meant those tender words when, out there under the looming monuments, she had accepted Wildfire. She had been nothing but an impulsive child. Her scorn and fury that morning of the race had left nothing for him except footless fancies. She had mistaken love of Wildfire for love of him. No, his case was hopeless with Lucy, and if it had not been so, Bostil would have made it hopeless. Yet there were things Sloane could not fathom. The wilful, contradictory, proud and cold and unaccountably sweet looks and actions of the girl. They haunted Sloane. They made him conscious that he had a mind, and tortured him with development. But he had no experience with girls to compare with what was happening now. It seemed that accepted fact and remembered scorn and cold certainty were somehow at variance with hitherto unknown intuitions and instincts. Lucy avoided him, if by chance she encountered him alone. When Bostil or Aunt Jane or anyone else was present, Lucy was kind, pleasant, agreeable. What made her flush red at sight of him, then pale? Why did she often at the table or in the big living-room softly brush against him when it seemed she could have avoided that? Many times he had felt some inconceivable drawing power, and looked up to find her eyes upon him, strange eyes full of mystery, that were suddenly averted. Was there any meaning attachable to the fact that his room was kept so tidy and neat, that every day something was added to its comfort or colour, that he found fresh flowers whenever he returned, or a book, or fruit, or a dainty morsel to eat, and once a bunch of Indian paintbrush, wild flowers of the desert that Lucy knew he loved? Most of all, it was Lucy's eyes which haunted Sloane, eyes that had changed, darkened, lost their audacious flash, and yet seemed all the sweeter. The glances he caught, which he fancied were stolen, and then derided his fancy, thrilled him to his heart. Thus Sloane had spent waking hours by day and night, mad with love and remorse, tormented 1 hour by imagined grounds for hope, and resigned to despair the next. Upon the 6th morning of his stay at Bostil's, Sloane rose with something of his former will reasserting himself. He could not remain in Bostil's home any longer unless he accepted Bostil's offer, and this was not to be thought of. With a wrench, Sloane threw off the softening indecision, and hurried out to find Bostil while the determination was hot. Bostil was in the corral with Wildfire. This was the second time Sloane had found him there. Wildfire appeared to regard Bostil with much better favour than he did his master. As Sloane noted this, a little heat stole along his veins. That was gall to a rider. "I like your hoss," said Bostil with gruff frankness, but a twinge of red showed under his beard. "Bostil, I'm sorry. I can't take you up on the job," rejoined Sloane swiftly. "It's been hard for me to decide. You've been good to me. I'm grateful. But it's time I was telling you." "Why can't you?" demanded Bostil, straightening up with a glint in his big eyes. It was the first time he had asked Sloane that. "I can't ride for you," replied Sloane briefly. "Anything to do with Lucy?" queried Bostil. "How so?" returned Sloane, conscious of more heat. "While you was sweet on her, and she wouldn't have you," replied Bostil. Sloane felt the blood swell and boil in his veins. This Bostil could say as harsh and hard things as repute gave him credit for. "Yes, I am sweet on Lucy, and she won't have me," said Sloane steadily. "I asked her to let me come to you and tell you I wanted to marry her, but she wouldn't." "Well, it's just as good you didn't come, because I might—" Bostil broke off his speech and began again. "You don't lack nerve, Sloane. What do you have to offer Lucy?" "Well, nothing except— But that doesn't matter," replied Sloane, cut to the quick by Bostil's scorn. "I'm glad you know, and so much for that." Bostil turned to look at Wildfire once more, and he looked long. When he faced around again, he was another man. Sloane felt the powerful, driving passion of this old horse-trader. "Sloane, I'll give you pick of 100 mustangs and $1,000 for Wildfire." And so he unmasked his power in the face of a beggarly rider. Though it struck Sloane like a thunderbolt, he felt amused, but he did not show that. Bostil had only one possession among all his uncounted wealth that could win Wildfire from his owner. "No," said Sloane briefly. "I'll double it," returned Bostil just as briefly. "No." "I'll—" "Save your breath, Bostil," flashed Sloane. "You don't know me, but let me tell you, you can't buy my horse." The great veins swelled and churned in Bostil's bull neck. A thick and ugly contortion worked in his face. His eyes reflected a sick rage. Sloane saw that two possessions shook Bostil. One a bitter, terrible disappointment, and the other the passion of a man who could not brook being crossed. It appeared to Sloane that the best thing he could do was to get away quickly, and to this end he led Wildfire out of the corral to the stable courtyard, and there quickly saddled him. Then he went into another corral for his other horse, Nagger, and bringing him out, returned to find Bostil had followed as far as the court. The old man's rage apparently had passed or had been smothered.
"See here," he began in a thick voice. "Don't be a damn fool and ruin your chance in life.
Bostil, my one chance was ruined, and you know who did it," replied Sloane as he gathered Nagger's rope and Wildfire's bridle together. "I've no hard feelings, but I can't sell you my horse, and I can't ride for you because it would breed trouble."
"And what kind?"
queried Bostil. Hawley and Farland and Van, with several other riders, had come up and were standing open-mouthed. Sloane gathered from their manner and expression that anything might happen with Bostil in such a mood. "Well, we'd be racing the King and Wildfire, wouldn't we?" replied Sloane.
"And supposing we would,"
returned Bostil ominously. His huge frame vibrated with a slight start. "Well, Wildfire would run off with your favorite, and you wouldn't like that," answered Sloane. It was his rider's hot blood that prompted him to launch his taunt. He could not help it.
"You wild hoss chaser!"
roared Bostil.
"Your Wildfire may be a bloody killer, but he can't beat the king in a race."
"Excuse me, Bostil, but Wildfire did beat the king." This was only adding fuel to the fire. Sloane saw Hawley making signs that must have meant silence would be best, but Sloane's blood was up. Bostil had rubbed him the wrong way.
"You're a liar,"
declared Bostil with a tremendous stride forward. Sloane saw then how dangerous the man really was.
"There was no race. Your wild hoss knocked the king off the track."
"Sage King had the lead, didn't he? Why didn't he keep it?" Bostil was like a furious, intractable child whose favorite precious treasure had been broken, and he burst out into a torrent of incoherent speech, apparently reasons why this and that were so. Sloane did not make out what Bostil meant, and he did not care. When Bostil got out of breath, Sloane said, "We're both wasting talk, and I'm not wanting you to call me a liar twice. Put your rider up on the king and come on right now.
"Sloane, shut up and chase yourself,"
interrupted Hawley. "You go to hell," returned Sloane coolly. There was a moment's silence in which Sloane took Hawley's measure. The hawk-eyed old rider may have been square, but he was then thinking only of Bostil. "What am I up against here?" demanded Sloane. "Am I gonna be shot because I'm taking my own part? Hawley, you and the rest of your pards are all afraid of this old devil, but I'm not, and you stay out of this."
"Well, son, you needn't get riled,"
replied Hawley placatingly.
"I was only trying to stave off talk you might be sorry for."
"Sorry for nothing. I'm going to make this great horse trader, this rich and mighty rancher, this judge of grand horses, this Bostil, I'm going to make him race the king or take water." Then Sloane turned to Bostil. That worthy evidently had been stunned by the rider who dared call him to his face. "Come on, fetch the king. Let your own riders judge the race." Bostil struggled to both control himself and to speak.
"Nah, I ain't gonna see that red hoss killer jump the king again."
"You're afraid. You know there'd be no girl on his back. You know he can outrun the king, and that's why you want to buy him." Sloane caught his breath then. He realized suddenly, at Bostil's paling face, that perhaps he had dared too much. It may be the truth flung into this hard old rider's teeth was what he needed more than anything else. Sloane divined rather than saw that he had done an unprecedented thing. "I'll go now, Bostil." Sloane nodded a goodbye to the riders, and turning away he led the two horses down the lane toward the house. It scarcely needed sight of Lucy under the cottonwoods to still his anger and rouse his regret. Lucy saw him coming, and as usual started to avoid meeting him, when the sight of the horses, or something else, caused her to come toward him instead. Sloane halted. Both Wildfire and Nagger whinnied at the sight of the girl. Lucy took one flashing glance at them, at Sloane, and then she evidently guessed what was amiss.
"Lucy, I've done it now. Played Hobbs, sure," said Sloane.
"What?" she cried.
"I called your dad, called him good and hard, and he...
Lynn! Oh, don't say Dad! Lucy's face whitened, and she put a swift hand upon his arm, a touch that thrilled him. Lynn, there's blood on your face. Don't tell me Dad hit you.
"I should say not," declared Sloane, quickly lifting his hand to his face. "Must be from my cut. That blood I barked my hand holding Wildfire."
"Oh, I was sick with—" Lucy faltered and broke off, and then drew back quickly, as if suddenly conscious of her actions and words. Then Sloane began to relate everything that had been said, and before he concluded his story his heart gave a wild throb at the telltale face and eyes of the girl. "You said that to Dad?" she cried in amaze and fear and admiration. "Oh, Dad richly deserved it. But I wish you hadn't. Oh, I wish you hadn't."
"Why?" asked Sloane.
But she did not answer that. "Where are you going?" she questioned.
"Come to think of that, I don't know," replied Sloane blankly. "I started back to fetch my things out of my room. That's as far as my muddled thoughts got."
"Your things? Oh!" Suddenly she grew intensely white. The little freckles that had been so indistinct stood out markedly, and it was as if she had never had any tan. One brown hand went to her breast, the other fluttered to his arm again. "You mean to go away? For good?"
"Sure. What else can I do?"
"Lynn! Oh, there comes Dad. He mustn't see me. I must run. Lynn, don't leave Bostil's Ford. Don't go. Don't!" Then she flew round the corner of the house to disappear. Sloane stood there transfixed and thrilling. Even Bostil's heavy tread did not break the trance. And a meeting would have been unavoidable had not Bostil turned down the path that led to the back of the house. Sloane, with a start collecting his thoughts, hurried into the little room that had been his, and gathered up his few belongings. He was careful to leave behind the gifts of guns, blankets, gloves, and other riders' belongings which Bostil had presented him. Thus laden, he went outside, and, tingling with emotions utterly sweet and bewildering, he led the horses down into the village. Sloane went down to Bracton's and put the horses into a large high-fenced pasture adjoining Bracton's house. Sloane felt reasonably sure his horses would be safe there, but he meant to keep a mighty close watch on them. And old Bracton, as if he read Sloane's mind, said this: "Keep your eye on that dafty boy, Joel Creech. He hangs round my place, sleeps out somewheres, and he's crazy about horses." Sloane did not need any warning like that, nor any information to make him curious regarding young Creech. Lucy had seen to that, and in fact Sloane was anxious to meet this half-witted fellow who had so grievously offended and threatened Lucy. That morning, however, Creech did not put in an appearance. The village had nearly returned to its normal state now, and the sleepy tenor of its way. The Indians had been the last to go, but now none remained. The days were hot while the sun stayed high, and only the riders braved its heat. The morning, however, did not pass without an interesting incident. Bracton approached Sloane with an offer that he could take charge of the freighting between the Ford and Durango. "What would I do with Wildfire?" was Sloane's questioning reply, and Bracton held up his hands. A later incident earned more of Sloane's attention. He had observed a man in Bracton's store, and it chanced that this man heard Sloane's reply to Bracton's offer, and he said, "You'll sure need to corral that red stallion. Grandest hoss I ever seen." That praise won Sloane, and he engaged in conversation with the man, who said his name was Voorhees. It developed soon that Voorhees owned a little house, a corral, and a patch of ground on a likely site up under the bluff, and he was anxious to sell cheap because he had a fine opportunity at Durango where his people lived. What interested Sloane most was the man's remark that he had a corral which could not be broken into. The price he asked was ridiculously low if the property was worth anything. An idea flashed across Sloane's mind. He went up to Voorhees' place and was much pleased with everything, especially the corral, which had been built by a man who feared horse thieves as much as Bostil. The view from the door of the little cabin was magnificent, beyond compare. Sloane remembered Lucy's last words. They rang like bells in his ears. "Don't go! Don't!" They were enough to chain him to Bostil's Ford until the crack of doom. He dared not dream of what they meant. He only listened to their music as they pealed over and over in his ears. "Voorhees, are you serious?" he asked. "The money you ask is little enough." "It's enough and to spare," replied the man, "and I'd take it as a favor of you." "Well, I'll go you," said Sloane, and he laughed a little irrationally. "Only you needn't tell right away that I bought you out." The deal was consummated, leaving Sloane still with half of the money that had been his prize in the race. He felt elated. He was rich. He owned 2 horses, one the grandest in all the uplands, the other the faithfulest, and he owned a neat little cabin where it was a joy to sit and look out, and a corral which would let him sleep at night, and he had money to put into supplies and furnishings and a garden. After he drank out of the spring that bubbled from under the bluff, he told him himself alone it was worth the money. "Looks right down on Bostil's place," Sloane soliloquized with glee. "Won't he be just mad? And Lucy, whatever she's going to think." The more Sloane looked round and thought, the more he became convinced that good fortune had knocked at his door at last, and when he returned to Bracton's he was in an exultant mood. The old storekeeper gave him a nudge and pointed underhand to a young man of ragged aspect sitting gloomily on a box. Sloane recognized Joel Creech. The fellow surely made a pathetic sight, and Sloane pitied him. He looked needy and hungry. "Say," said Sloane impulsively, "want to help me carry some grub and stuff?" "Howdy," replied Creech, raising his head. "Sure do." Sloane sustained the queerest shock of his life when he met the gaze of those contrasting eyes. Yet he did not believe that his strange feeling came from the sight of different-colored eyes. There was an instinct or portent in that meeting. He purchased a bill of goods from Bracton, and, with Creech helping, carried it up to the cabin under the bluff. 3 trips were needed to pack up all the supplies, and meanwhile Creech had but few words to say, and these of no moment. Sloane offered him money, which he refused. "I'll help you fix up and eat a bite," he said. "Nice up here." He seemed rational enough, and certainly responded to kindness. Sloane found that Voorhees had left the cabin so clean there was little cleaning to do. An open fireplace of stone required some repair, and there was wood to cut. "Joel, you start a fire while I go down after my horses," said Sloane. Young Creech nodded, and Sloane left him there. It was not easy to catch Wildfire, nor any easier to get him into the new corral, but at last Sloane saw him safely there, and the bars and locks on the gate might have defied any effort to open or break them quickly. Creech was standing in the doorway watching the horses, and somehow Sloane saw, or imagined he saw, that Creech wore a different aspect. "Grand wild hoss. He did what Blue was a-gonna do, beat that there damned Bostil's king." Creech wagged his head. He was gloomy and strange. His eyes were unpleasant to look into. His face changed, and he mumbled. Sloane pitied him the more, but wished to see the last of him. Creech stayed on, however, and grew stranger and more talkative during the meal. He repeated things often, talked disconnectedly, and gave other indications that he was not wholly right in his mind. Yet Sloane suspected that Creech's want of balance consisted only in what concerned horses and the Bostils. And Sloane, wanting to learn all he could, encouraged Creech to talk about his father, the racers, and the river and boat, and finally Bostil. Sloane became convinced that, whether young Creech was half crazy or not, he knew his father's horses were doomed, and that the boat at the ferry had been cut adrift. Sloane could not understand why he was so convinced, but he was. Finally, Creech told how he had gone down to the river only a day before, how he had found the flood still raging, but much lower, how he had worked round the cliffs and had pulled up the rope cables to find they had been cut. "You see, Bostil cut them when he didn't need to," continued Creech shrewdly. "But he didn't know the flood was coming down so quick. He was afeard we'd come across and get the boat that night, and he meant to take away them cut cables. But he had no time." "Bostil?" queried Sloane as he gazed hard at Creech. The fellow had told that rationally enough. Sloane wondered if Bostil could have been so base. No. And yet, when it came to horses, Bostil was scarcely human. Sloane's query served to send Creech off on another tangent which wound up in dark, mysterious threats. Then Sloane caught the name of Lucy. It abruptly killed his sympathy for Creech. "What's the girl got to do with it?" he demanded angrily. "If you want to talk to me, don't use her name." "I'll use her name when I want," shouted Creech. "Not to me." "Yes, to you, mister. I ain't caring a damn for you." "You crazy loon!" exclaimed Sloane with impatience and disgust added to anger. "What's the use of being decent to you?" Creech crouched low, his hand digging like claws into the table as if he were making ready to spring. At that instant he was hideous. "Crazy, am I?" he yelled. "Maybe not damn crazy. I can tell you're gone on Lucy Bostil. I seen you with her out in the rocks the morning of the race. I seen what you did to her, and I'm gonna tell it, and I'm a-gonna kitch Lucy Bostil and strip her naked, and when I get through with her I'll tie her on a hoss and fire the grass. By God, I am!" Livid and wild, he breathed hard as he got up, facing Sloane malignantly. "Crazy or not, here goes," muttered Sloane grimly, and leaping up with one blow he knocked Creech half out the door, then kicked him the rest of the way. "Go on and have a fit," cried Sloane. "I'm liable to kill you if you don't have one." Creech got up and ran down the path, turning twice on the way. Then he disappeared among the trees. Sloane sat down. "Lost my temper again," he said. "This has been a day. Guess I'd better cool off right now and stay here. That poor devil. Maybe he's not so crazy, but he's wilder than an Indian. I must warn Lucy. Lord, I wonder if Bostil could have held back repairing that boat and then cut it loose. I wonder. Yesterday I'd have swore never, but today." Sloane drove the conclusion of that thought out of his consciousness before he wholly admitted it. Then he set to work cutting the long grass from the wet and shady nooks under the bluff, where the spring made the ground rich. He carried an armful down to the corral. Nagger was roaming around outside, picking grass for himself. Wildfire snorted as always when he saw Sloane, and Sloane, as always, when time permitted, tried to coax the stallion to him. He had never succeeded, nor did he this time. When he left the bundle of grass on the ground and went outside, Wildfire readily came for it. "You're that tame anyhow, you hungry red devil," said Sloane jealously. Wildfire would take a bunch of grass from Lucy Bostil's hand. Sloane's feelings had undergone some reaction, though he still loved the horse, but it was love mixed with bitterness. More than ever he had made up his mind that Lucy should have Wildfire. Then he walked around his place, planning the work he meant to start at once. Several days slipped by with Sloane scarcely realizing how they flew. Unaccustomed labor tired him so that he went to bed early and slept like a log. If it had not been for the ever-present worry and suspense, and longing in regard to Lucy, he would have been happier than ever he could remember. Almost at once he had become attached to his little home, and the more he labored to make it productive and comfortable, the stronger grew his attachment. Practical toil was not conducive to daydreaming, so Sloane felt a loss of something vague and sweet. Many times he caught himself watching with eager eyes for a glimpse of Lucy Bostil down there among the cottonwoods. Still he never saw her, and in fact he saw so few villagers that the place began to have a loneliness which endeared it to him the more. Then the view down the grey valley to the purple monuments was always thrillingly memorable to Sloane. It was out there Lucy had saved his horse and his life. His keen desert gaze could make out even at that distance the great dark monument, gold-crowned, in the shadow of which he had heard Lucy speak words that had transformed life for him. He would ride out there some day. The spell of those looming grand shafts of coloured rock was still strong upon him. One morning Sloane had a visitor, old Bracton. Sloane's cordiality died on his lips before it was half uttered. Bracton's former friendliness was not in evidence. Indeed, he looked at Sloane with curiosity and disfavour.
"Howdy, Sloane. I just wanted to see what you was doing up here," he said.
Sloane spread his hands and explained in a few words.
"So you took over the place, hey? We all figured that. Before he's was Mum. Fact is, he sure was mysterious."
Bracton sat down and eyed Sloane with interest.
"Folks are talking a lot about ye," he said bluntly.
"Is that so?"
"You appear to be a pretty mysterious kind of feller, Sloane. I kind of took a shine to you at first, and that's why I came up here to tell you that it's wise for you to vamoose."
"What?" exclaimed Sloane. Bracton repeated substantially what he had said, and pausing an instant, continued,
"I've no call to give you a hunch, but I'll do it just because I did like you first off."
The old man seemed fussy and nervous and patronizing and disparaging all at once.
"What'd you beat up that poor Joel Creech for?" demanded Bracton.
"He got what he deserved," replied Sloane, and the memory coming on the head of this strange attitude of Bracton's roused Sloane's temper.
"Well, Joel tells some queer things about you. For instance, how you took advantage of little Lucy Bostil, grabbing her and mauling her the way Joel's seen you."
"Damn the loon!" muttered Sloane, rising to pace the path.
"Well, Joel's a bit off, but he's not loony all the time. He's seen you, and he's telling it. When Bostil hears it, you'd better be across the canyon."
Sloane felt the hot, sick rush of blood to his face, and humiliation and rage overtook him.
"Joel's down at my house. He had fits after you beat him, and he ain't got over them yet. But he could blab to the riders. Van Sickle's looking for you. And today, when I was alone with Joel, he told me some more queer things about you. I shut 'em up quick, but I ain't guaranteeing I can keep 'em shut up."
"I'll bet you I shut 'em up," declared Sloane. "What more did the fool say?"
"Sloane, have you been round these here parts, down among the monuments, for any considerable time?" queried Bracton.
"Yes, I have. Several weeks out there, and about 10 days or so round the ford."
"Where was you the night of the flood?"
The shrewd scrutiny of the old man, the suspicion, angered Sloane. "If it's any of your mix, I was out on the slope among the rocks. I heard the flood coming down long before it got here," replied Sloane deliberately. Bracton averted his gaze, and abruptly rose as if the occasion was ended.
"Well, I'll take my hunch and leave,"
he said, turning away. "Bracton, if you mean well, I'm obliged," returned Sloane slowly, ponderingly. "But I'll not take the hunch."
"Suit yourself,"
added Bracton coldly, and he went away. Sloane watched him go down the path and disappear into the lane of cottonwoods. "I'll be darned," muttered Sloane. "Funny old man. Maybe Creech's not the only loony one hereabouts." Sloane tried to laugh off the effect of the interview, but it persisted and worried him all day. After supper he decided to walk down to the village, and would have done so but not for the fact that he saw a man climbing his path. When he recognized the rider Holly, he sensed trouble, and straightway he became gloomy. Bostil's right-hand man could not call on him for any friendly reason. Holly came up slowly, awkwardly, after the manner of a rider unused to walking. Sloane had built a little porch on the front of his cabin and a bench, which he had covered with goatskins. It struck him a little strangely that he should bend over to rearrange these skins just as Holly approached the porch.
"Howdy, son,"
was the rider's drawled remark.
"Sure makes me puff to climb up this here mountain."
Sloane turned instantly, surprised at the friendly tone, doubting his own ears and wanting to verify them. He was more surprised to see Holly unmistakably amiable.
"Hello, Holly, how are you?" he replied. "Have a seat." "Well, I'm right spry for an old bird, but I can't climb with a damn. Say, this here beats Bostil's view."
"Yes, it's fine," replied Sloane rather awkwardly, as he sat down on the porch step. What could Holly want with him? This old rider was above curiosity or gossip.
"Sloane, you ain't holding it against me that I tried to shut you up the other day?" he drawled with dry frankness.
"Why, no, Holly, I'm not. I saw your point. You were right. But Bostil made me mad."
"Sure, he'd make anybody mad. I've seen riders bite themselves, they was so mad at Bostil. You called him, and you sure tickled all the boys. But you hurt yourself, for Bostil owns and runs this here ford."
"So I've discovered," replied Sloane.
"You got yourself in bad right off, for Bostil has turned the riders against you, and this here punching the Creech has turned the village folks against you. What'd you pitch into him for?"
Sloane caught the kindly interest and intent of the rider, and it warmed him as Bracton's disapproval had alienated him.
"Well, I reckon I'd better tell you," drawled Holly as Sloane hesitated, "that Lucy wants to know if you beat up Joel and why you did."
"Holly?
Did she ask you to find out?" "Well, she sure did. This girl's worried these days, Sloane. You see, you haven't been coming around, and you don't know what's coming off."
"Bracton was here today, and he told me a good deal. I'm worried, too," said Sloane dejectedly.
"That horse of yours, Wildfire, he's enough to make you hate it in Bostil's camp, even if you had made a fool of yourself, which you sure have."
Sloane dropped his head as admission.
"What, Creech swears he's seen you do to Miss Lucy out there among the rocks where you was hiding Wildfire. Was there any truth to that?"
asked Holly earnestly.
"Tell me, Sloane. Folks believe it, and it's hurt you at the ford. Bostil hasn't heard it yet, and Lucy, she doesn't know. But I'm figuring that you punched Joel 'cause he throwed it in your face."
"He did, and I lambasted him," replied Sloane with force.
"You did right. But what I want to know, is it true what Joel's seen?"
"It's true, Holly. But what I did isn't so bad as he'd made it look."
"Well, I knowed that. I knowed for a long time how Lucy cares for you,"
returned the old rider kindly. Sloane raised his head swiftly, incredulously. "Holly, you can't be serious."
"Well, I am. I've been sort of a big brother to Lucy Bostil for 18 years. I carried her in these here hands when she weighed no more'n my spurs. Taught her how to ride, what she knows about hosses. She knows more'n her dad. Taught her how to shoot. I know her better'n anybody. Lately she's been different. She's worried and unhappy."
"But, Holly, all that, it doesn't seem—"
"I reckon not,"
went on Holly as Sloane halted.
"I think she cares for ye, and I'm your friend, Sloane." You're going to buck up against some hell round here sooner or later, and you'll need a friend."
"Thanks, Holly," replied Sloane unsteadily. He thrilled under the iron grasp of the rider's hard hand.
"You've got another friend you can gamble on," said Holly significantly.
"Another? Who?"
"Lucy Bostil. And don't you forget that. I'll bet she'll raise more trouble than Bostil when she hears what Joel Creech's telling, for she's bound to hear it. Van Sickle swears he's a-gonna tell her and then beat you up with a quart."
"He is he?" snapped Sloane darkly.
"I have a hunch Lucy's guessed why you punched Joel, but she wants to know for sure. Now, Sloane, I'll tell her why."
"Oh, don't," said Sloane involuntarily.
"Well, it'd be better coming from you and me. Take my word for that. I'll prepare Lucy, and she's as good a scrapper as Bostil any day."
"It all scares me," replied Sloane. He did feel panicky, and that was from thoughts of what shame might befall Lucy. The cold sweat oozed out of every pore. What might Bostil do? "Holly, I love the girl, so I didn't insult her. Bostil will never understand, and what's he goin' to do when he finds out?"
"Well, let's just hope you won't get any worse you giving Joel."
"Let Bostil beat me," ejaculated Stone. "I think I'm willing, now, the way I feel. But I've a temper, and Bostil rubs me the wrong way."
"Well, I'll leave your gun home and fight Bostil. You're pretty husky. Sure, he'll lick you, but maybe you could give the old cuss a black eye."
Holly laughed as if the idea gave him infinite pleasure. "Fight Bostil? Lucy would hate me," cried Sloane.
"Nix. You don't know that kid. If the old man goes after you, Lucy'll care for you more. She's just like him in some ways."
Holly pulled out a stubby black pipe, and filling it and lighting it, he appeared to grow more thoughtful.
"It wasn't only Lucy that sent me up here to see you. Bostil's been pestering me for days, but I kept fighting shy of it till Lucy got hold of me."
"Bostil sent you? Why?"
"Reckon you can guess. He can't sleep thinking about your red hoss. None of us ever seen Bostil have such a bad case. He raised Sage King, but he's always been crazy for a wild stallion. And here you come along, and your horse jumps the king, and there's trouble generally."
"Holly, do you think Wildfire can beat Sage King?" asked Sloane eagerly.
"I reckon I do. Lucy says so, and I'll back her any day. But, son, I ain't parading what I think. I'd get it bad myself. Farland and the other boys, they're with Bostil. Van, he's to blame for that. He's taken a dislike to you right off. And what he tells Bostil and the boys about that race don't agree with what Lucy tells me. Lucy says Wildfire ran fiery and cranky at the start. He wanted to run around and kill the king instead of racing. So he was 3 lengths behind when Macomber dropped the flag. Lucy says the king got into his stride. She knows. And there Wildfire comes from behind and climbs all over the king. Van tells a different story.
"I came off just as Lucy told you," declared Sloane. "I saw every move."
"Well, that's neither here nor there. What you're up against is this. Bostil is sore since you called him, but he holds himself in because he hasn't given up hope of getting Wildfire. And Sloane, you're sure wise, ain't you, that if Bostil doesn't buy him, you can't stay on here?"
"I'm wise, but I won't sell Wildfire," replied Sloane doggedly.
"Well, I'd never wasted my breath telling you all this if I hadn't figured about Lucy. You've got her to think of."
Sloane turned on Holly passionately.
"You keep hinting there's a hope for me when I know there's none." "You're only a boy," replied Holly. "Son, where there's life, there's hope. I ain't a-going to tell you again that I know Lucy Bostil."
Sloane could not stand, nor walk, nor keep still. He was shaking from head to foot. "But Wildfire's not mine to sell. He's Lucy's," confessed Sloane. "The devil you say?" ejaculated Holly, and he nearly dropped his pipe. "I gave Wildfire to her. She accepted him. It was done. Then I lost my head and made her mad, and she said she'd ride him in the race but wouldn't keep him. But he is hers." "Oh, I see. Sloane, I was going to advise you to sell Wildfire all on account of Lucy. You're young and you'd have a big start in life if you would. But Lucy's your girl and you give her the hoss? Well, that settles that. If I go away from here and leave Wildfire for Lucy, do you think she could keep him? Wouldn't Bostil take him from her?" "Well, son, if he tried that on Lucy, she'd jump Wildfire and hit your trail and hang on to it till she found you." "Well, what'll you tell Bostil?" asked Sloane, half beside himself. "I'm consarned if I know," replied Holly. "Maybe I'll think of some idea. I'll go back now. Say, son, I reckon you'd better hang close to home. If you meet Bostil down in the village, you two'd clash for sure. I'll come up soon, but it'll be after dark." "Holly, all this is good of you," said Sloane. "I'll—" "Shut up, son," interrupted the rider dryly. "That's your only weakness, so far as I can see. You say too much." Holly started down then, his long, clinking spurs digging into the steep path. He left Sloane a prey to deep thoughts at once anxious and dreamy. Next day, Sloane worked hard all day, looking forward to nightfall, expecting that Holly would come up. He tried to resist the sweet and tantalizing anticipation of a message from Lucy, but in vain. The rider had immeasurably uplifted Sloane's hope that Lucy at least cared for him. Not for a moment all day could Sloane drive away the hope. At twilight he was too eager to eat, too obsessed to see the magnificent sunset. But Holly did not come, and Sloane went to bed late, half sick with disappointment. The next day was worse. Sloane found work irksome, yet he held to it. On the third day he rested and dreamed, and grew doubtful again, and then moody. On the fourth day Sloane found he needed supplies that he must obtain from the store. He did not forget Holly's warning, but he disregarded it, thinking there would scarcely be a chance of meeting Bostil at midday. There were horses standing, bridles down before Bracton's place, and riders lounging at the rail and the step. Some of these men had been pleasant to Sloane on earlier occasions. This day they seemed not to see him. Sloane was tingling all over when he went into the store. Some deviltry was afoot. He had an angry thought that these riders could not have minds of their own. Just inside the door Sloane encountered Weatherby, the young rancher from Durango. Sloane spoke, but Weatherby only replied with an insolent stare. Sloane did not glance at the man to whom Weatherby was talking. Only a few people were inside the store, and Bracton was waiting upon them. Sloane stood back a little in the shadow. Bracton had observed his entrance, but did not greet him. Then Sloane absolutely knew that for him the goodwill of Bostil's Ford was a thing of the past. Presently Bracton was at leisure, but he showed no disposition to attend to Sloane's wants. Then Sloane walked up to the counter and asked for supplies. "Have you got the money?" asked Bracton, as if addressing one he would not trust. "Yes," replied Sloane, growing red under an insult that he knew Weatherby had heard. Bracton handed out the supplies and received the money without a word. He held his head down. It was a singular action for a man used to dealing fairly with everyone. Sloane felt outraged. He hurried out of the place, with shame burning him, with his own eyes downcast, and in his hurry he bumped square into a burly form. Sloane recoiled, looked up. Bostil! The old rider was eyeing him with cool speculation. "Well, are you drunk?" he queried without any particular expression. Yet the query was to Sloane like a blow. It brought his head up with a jerk, his glance steady and keen on Bostil's.
"Bostil, you know I don't drink," he said.
"Uh-huh. I know a lot about you, Sloane. I heard you bought Voorhees' place up on the bench."
"Yes."
"Did he tell you it was mortgaged to me for more'n it's worth?"
"No, he didn't."
"Did he make over any papers to you?"
"No."
"Well, if it interests you, I'll show you papers that proves the property's mine."
Sloane suffered a pang. The little home had grown dearer and dearer to him.
"All right, Bostil. If it's yours, he said, calmly enough. "I reckon I drove you out before this if I hadn't felt we could make a deal."
"We can't agree on any deal, Bostil," replied Sloane steadily. It was not what Bostil said, but the way he said it, the subtle meaning and power behind it, that gave Sloane a sense of menace and peril. These he had been used to for years. He could meet them. But he was handicapped here because it seemed that, though he could meet Bostil face to face, he could not fight him. For he was Lucy's father. Sloane's position, the impotence of it, rendered him less able to control his temper.
"Why can't we?" demanded Bostil. "If you wasn't so touchy, we could. And let me say, young feller, that there's more reason now you do make a deal with me."
"Deal? What about?"
"About your red hoss."
"Wildfire? No deals, Bostil," returned Sloane, and made as if to pass him. The big hand that forced Sloane back was far from gentle, and again he felt the quick rush of blood.
"Maybe I can tell you something that'll make you sell Wildfire," said Bostil.
"Not if you talked yourself dumb," flashed Sloane. There was no use to try to keep cool with this Bostil if he talked horses. "I'll race Wildfire against the king, but no more."
"Race? Why, we don't run races round here without stakes," replied Bostil with deep scorn. "And what can you bet? That little dab of prize money is gone, and there wouldn't be enough to meet me. You're a strange one in these parts. I've pride and reputation to uphold. You brag of racing with me, and you a beggarly rider. You wouldn't have them clothes and boots if my girl hadn't fetched them to you."
The riders behind Bostil laughed. Weatherby's face was there in the door, not amused, but hard with scorn and something else. Sloane felt a sickening, terrible gust of passion. It fairly shook him. And as the wave subsided, the quick cooling of skin and body pained him like a burn made with ice. "Yes, Bostil, I'm what you say," responded Sloane, and his voice seemed to fill his ears. "But you're dead wrong when you say I've nothing to bet on the race."
"Then what'll you bet?"
"My life and my horse." The riders suddenly grew silent and intense. Bostil vibrated to that. He turned white. He, more than any rider on the uplands, must have felt the nature of that offer.
"Against what?"
he demanded, hoarsely. "Your daughter, Lucy." One instant the surprise held Bostil mute and motionless. Then he seemed to expand. His huge bulk jerked into motion, and he bellowed like a mad bull. Sloane saw the blow coming, made no move to avoid it. The big fist took him square on the mouth and chin and laid him flat on the ground. Sight failed Sloane a little, and likewise ability to move, but he did not lose consciousness. His head seemed to have been burst into rays and red mist that blurred his eyes. Then these cleared away, leaving intense pain. He started to get up, his brain a whirl. Where was his gun? He had left it at home. But for that he would have killed Bostil. He had already killed one man. The thing was a burning flash, then all over. He could do it again, but Bostil was Lucy's father. Sloane gathered up the packages of supplies, and without looking at the men he hurried away. He seemed possessed of a fury to turn and run back. Some force, like an invisible hand, withheld him. When he reached the cabin, he shut himself in and lay on his bunk, forgetting that the place did not belong to him, alive only to the mystery of his trouble, smarting with the shame of the assault upon him. It was dark before he composed himself and went out, and then he had not the desire to eat. He made no move to open the supplies of food, did not even make a light. But he went out to take grass and water to the horses. When he returned to the cabin, a man was standing on the porch. Sloane recognized Holly's shape and then his voice.
"Son, you raised the devil today."
"Holly, don't you go back on me," cried Sloane. "I was driven."
"Don't talk so loud,"
whispered the rider in return.
"I've only a minute. Here, a letter from Lucy. And, son, don't get the idea that I'll go back on you."
Sloane took the letter with trembling fingers. All the fury and gloom instantly fled. Lucy had written him. He could not speak.
"Son, I'm double-crossing the boss right this minute,"
whispered Holly hoarsely.
"At the same time, I'm playing Lucy's game. If Bostil finds out, he'll kill me. I mustn't be kitched up here, but I won't lose track of you, wherever you go."
Holly slipped away stealthily in the dusk, leaving Sloane with a throbbing heart. "Wherever you go," he echoed. "Ah, forgot. I can't stay here." Lucy's letter made his fingers tingle, made them so hasty and awkward that he had difficulty in kindling blaze enough to see to read. The letter was short, written in lead pencil on a torn leaf of a ledger. Sloane could not read rapidly. Those years on the desert had seen to that, and his haste to learn what Lucy said bewildered him. At first all the words blurred. "Come at once to the bench on the cottonwoods. I'll meet you there. My heart is breaking. It's a lie what they say. I'll swear you were with me the night the boat was cut adrift. I know you didn't do that. I know who. Oh, come. I will stick to you. I will run off with you. I love you."